Hello to you. My name's Graham Cooper. I'm Head of Future Markets at National Grid. And thank you for inviting me to speak today at the International Workshop on Sustainable Road Freight. So why is it somebody from an energy utility, and the UK's national utility from a transmission perspective, is being invited to talk to people about road freight? So let me just give you some context. So there's much going on in the energy markets as we see. So by the time we get to about 2045 or 2050, the UK is going to consume at least twice the amount of electricity than we do today. Now, to be able to do that, we will need at least 4 times the amount of clean generation than we have today, and that will mean we will need twice the grid capacity than we have today. So that's probably where I best come in, because when we think about that 100% growth in electricity demand, 15 to 20% of that future demand is decarbonising transport. Now, that means that we have a crucial role to play as the enabler of the transition to clean transport. So that's why I'm here to talk to you today, but I'm often aware that I'm the stranger in the room because I'm the energy guy and you're mainly transport people. So let's just give you some context on who we are and what we do. So look, National Grid are the transmission monopoly, so we're the big high voltage power lines in the UK. We operate in England and Wales for electricity, and in Scotland you have 2 Scottish transmission owners. You also then have National Grid Electricity System Operator, which is the control room that's actually 6 minutes behind me, who manage the real-time supply and demand. Now, the best way I found to describe, certainly to people in the transport sector, as to what National Grid do, is the best analogy that I can find is we're kind of like the national highways for the electricity system. So we own the motorways of the energy system in the UK. Now, the regional DNOs, the distribution network operators, they're the people who deliver the last mile. So they're the local roads and the roads in towns, if we're using that analogy, to get the power to the last mile. Now, when most people talk about the grid, they mean all of it, but obviously we're made up of different constituent parts. Now, I do need just to flag a couple of changes that people may be aware of in the energy system, in that National Grid recently sold a 60% share of the gas transmission system. So we own the we did own the gas transmission system in England, Scotland and Wales. So that's gone over to the Macquarie Group, or at least a consortia led by Macquarie Group. So 60% of that has been sold. And that has allowed us to buy Western Power Distribution. So WPD are the regional DNO, the distribution network operator for Devon and Cornwall, that big stripe across South Wales and a stripe across through the Midlands up to Lincolnshire. So that means we have a really unique perspective from everything from big power generation through the markets all the way down to regional distribution. Now, that also then brings me on to something to remind folks listening to this, in the fact that what is it that we don't do? So National Grid doesn't make power. National Grid doesn't buy power. National Grid doesn't sell power. We are purely the conduit from where it is made to where it is consumed. So that means we are that critical enabler, but we are not the driver of price in the wholesale market that people are experiencing right now. The importance, though, of these networks to transport is that transport is in effect a brand new market for us. Networks have been responding for years to new markets, and we respond in a way where someone applies for a grid connection and we deliver the grid connection. If that's a power station or a large consumer, or if it's a distribution level, that could be a home, an office. But when we're staring into the future of transport, we've never really had to engage with transport before. So for us, this is in effect a new market. Now that's quite important because we know how to deal with our existing customers and they know how to deal with us. But as we stare into this future of decarbonising transport, we are going to need to collaborate and work more closely with those who are decarbonising transport. So things that are going on in this space. So look, as I mentioned before, there's a huge amount going on in the energy system. So as I said, by 2050, the UK will consume at least twice the amount of electricity than we do today. That means we need 4 times the amount of clean generation, and conversely, that means twice the grid. So what does that mean to road freight more specifically? So from a renewables perspective, we're well on the way to greening the power system. So the UK, since about 2017, 2018, now has more power from clean sources than by burning stuff. So that means we're not moving exhaust pipe emissions just to a coal-fired power station. What we're doing is actually putting cleaner electrons in the power system every day. Now, from an offshore wind perspective, government's 10-point plan and the British Energy Security Strategy has committed to deliver a total of 50 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. Now, we're well underway with that, which means within the next 7 or so years, we will have more than 50 gigawatts of clean generation powering the grid. Now, that alone could decarbonise all road transport. So if we're going to bust the first myth, we will not be using electrification of transport to put a dirty generated fuel into vehicles. But what it also means is the scale of that clean energy is running ahead of the decarbonisation of transport. So there's a real opportunity to step up. As you'll see from the slide, the ultimate commitment is 120 gigawatts by 2050. So grid networks have been changing over the last 15 years to accommodate clean power, and we're changing right now. We're spending £15 billion to get for the right wires to get that power onto the system. So what does this mean for road freight? Well, the first thing is, under our license to operate, we have to be technology agnostic. So if you're looking for me to back one technology, I'm not able to do that. But what I find really interesting is, irrespective of the technology choice, you're going to need a grid connection. Let me just elaborate. So if you're going to have a battery truck or battery vans, you need a grid connection to power the charger. If you're going to put green hydrogen into trucks, then you're going to need a grid connection so that you can use that clean power to make hydrogen where you refuel. And then finally, if you're going to use catenary, if that's the answer for trucking, then you're going to need evenly spaced grid connection. So the nice thing from my perspective is we can progress with engaging with the industry and with government to try and progress the discussion on clean transport without ultimately having to know what the final answer is. We know that a future-proof grid connection, evenly spaced across the road network, is ultimately what transport needs. So where are we getting involved? So we've spent a long time helping government with Project Rapid and the Rapid Charging Fund. So that was the ability across England's motorway network and strategic road network to deliver future-proof grid capacity. Now, at the outset, that was for cars, but more recently we've been engaging with government, and to avoid having to spend an additional 650 million after the event, doing it whilst you do the Rapid Charging Fund is an economic and efficient way to do it. So we know that the Rapid Charging Fund is going to future-proof for all road vehicles, which is incredibly helpful. Do it right and do it once. So we're expecting the announcement of the delivery body in the new year, and then there'll be, I suspect, a small consultation on how that money is then spent. But it's not doing charges, it is delivering future-proof grid capacity. Then additionally, National Grid is supporting government on the ZERFT-D trial. So this is the 200 million zero-emission HGV trial, looking at principally battery and hydrogen trucks, but also probably reaching into catenary in the future. So we're supporting that from the progress of appropriate grid connections in the right place. The interesting thing for me is, if some of that ZERFT-D trial is on the strategic road network, we can actually double up and make the Rapid Charging Fund and ZERFT-D funding for the grid connections help each other out, which would be important. We see recently the government's announcement on welfare grants for operators of truck stops, and interestingly, it's the first time we've seen consideration of electric truck charging in that. And then finally, National Grid, from a sustainable road freight perspective, We see the value in showing everybody where our substations are, and so that's available through the National Grid Connect Now portal. All of the regional distribution network operators have a heat map, is the term, to show where all their substations are. So that will allow those thinking about decarbonisation to see where the grid is and have an idea of how it will help them. The one thing I would challenge, though, is don't always think about bringing the grid to the vehicles. It's always worth considering whether in your medium-term plans it might be more appropriate to move your depot to nearer the grid. Grid's expensive. It's not expensive because we make it so. It's expensive because the kit lasts for 40 years and we buy it on an international market. Now, the only other thing I want to just bring to your mind whilst we're thinking about decarbonisation of freight is that it's not the only thing that's moving. So decarbonising heat and transport, they're the two dirtiest things we do as a country. So if we think about it, in that doubling of demand for consumption of energy across the next 20 or 30 years, actually of that 100% growth in demand, 15 to 20% is decarbonising transport, 50 to 60% is decarbonising heat. So it's not just transport that's changing, and actually from a National Grid perspective, we're looking at this in the round, this whole systems approach, to understand where we have the right wires in the right place at the right time. But the nice thing from my perspective is we're actually creating a symbiotic relationship. So by having smart charging and charging at times when there's plenty of renewables on the grid, actually means that it helps finance future wind farms, which brings more renewables on the grid, which means that it drives down the cost of that clean electricity. Just whilst we're on the point of clean electricity, don't forget, when people think that renewables is more expensive than gas for powering the energy system, actually what we see through the CFD mechanisms, the contracts for difference mechanisms, is that offshore wind is going to be and being deployed at just over £40 a megawatt hour. So that's 4p a kilowatt hour at point of manufacture. So by the time you've added a little bit of network cost and some balancing cost, it's still the cheapest way to make large bulk energy generation. And again, reminder that being technology agnostic, that can flow through electrolyzers into green hydrogen, or it can power electric trucks through batteries or catenary. Conscious that my time is running short, the other important thing to point out here is this is talking about obviously clean air and climate change. There are other drivers as to why we need to move at pace. So the first one is clean air. 36,000 people die prematurely in the UK from the impacts of poor air quality, of which a good portion of that comes from transport. So we need to do this for local, hyper-local benefit. I mean, it costs the NHS £200 million in NHS and social care costs. That's important that we try to look at clean air. The other one is if we think about the challenge that we're facing right now around energy security. If you see the growth in sovereign energy, so the energy generated in the UK being put into vehicles in the UK, there's a large amount of energy independence that comes from that. And then the final piece for me around other drivers is the fact that we are, as we know, unfortunately heading into probably, as forecast, the longest recession in recent history. But one of the things that I'll tell you is in any economic study, they'll tell you the best thing to do in a time of recession and to build out of a recession is build long-term beneficial infrastructure. So if we can make sure that we've got future-proof grid capacity across the road network, that's money spent in the UK with UK companies to deliver for the UK, it will enable that decarbonisation of road freight long-term and give confidence to the market that the right capacity will be in the right place at the right time. So anyway, I'll just repeat to you guys that we can support all technology types. We are properly independent and technology agnostic. We do need timely, cost-effective and future-proof network solutions. We need to deliver that now because it takes 2 to 3 years to deliver big infrastructure along the motorway network, and you need confidence that you can make plans to decarbonise your fleet. And then what I will say is finally, collaboration is key. We are bringing 3 industrial sectors together here for success. We're bringing energy, transport and digital. And to do that successfully means collaboration. We don't have a magical crystal ball to understand what your demands or needs will be. Neither does government. So collectively, we need to be clear of our ask. We need to be able to be clear with what we need and when we need it, and understand the building blocks for success. So anyway, that's me. I look forward to answering any questions and hopefully being able to give you full answers to those questions in the Q&A. Thank you very much.